Okay, today I'm going to show you how we grow tomatoes here at PDX Garden Home. We start them in the greenhouse in seed trays, which I can't show you now because we started our tomatoes back in February. By the end of February we had them all planted out into little seeds. I'll show you over here the cell trays that we use. We use these cell trays and we let them grow until they're maybe about that tall, and then once they're that tall, then we transplant them into Costco's version of the red Solo cup. So we just take the red Solo cup and we poke a hole in the bottom, and then we transplant the tomato seedlings in there, and then we let them grow until they're ready to be transplanted out. And I'll take you around to the back of the greenhouse where we have a bunch of them set up. They're getting old now because we're now kind of first week into July. So these tomatoes probably will end up being composted because we've already got like about 50 different tomato plants in the field already, so we don't really need more. So follow me and I'll show you. So back here is one of the what we call hardening off areas, and so this is where we take things from inside the greenhouse when it starts to get too hot or when they grow up enough, and then we bring them outside so they get used to the outside before we put them in the field. So we did that with these tomato plants weeks ago, and then we never took them from there into the field because we just had too many anyway. So this is what it looks like. Right now this tomato plant would be root bound in here because it's just been in these cups for a while, and I just haven't had the heart to trash them yet. But you can see what it looks like if I take it out of the red cup. You'll see it's totally roots all the way to the bottom, all the way around. And I knew that without even looking at it, because one of the sure signs of that happening is when it grows this big, I just know from experience it's going to be root bound. But also what starts to happen is you're watering it, and even though you watered it thoroughly, by like later in the day it starts to look like it's wilting or it needs more water again, and that's just because it's got so many roots and there's so much small space there that it can't really get enough water with the sheer size of the roots and the size of the plant compared to the container that I have it in. So these there's only one of two solutions. If I wanted to keep these either should have been planted in the ground, or I should put them in bigger pots where they have more dirt that can contain more moisture. So that's our strategy. We start them in the little cell trays, we put them in the red Solo cups, we grow them up to about this size, and then we put them out into the field. And if you follow me, I can show you kind of different places we have them in the field. So in this row here, we're growing them in the, we had onions and garlic in here already, and then we put these posts in. We grow all what are called indeterminate tomatoes. And what that means is that the tomatoes will just keep growing indefinitely if the weather was perfect, which it's not in Oregon. But if the weather was perfect, they just keep growing up and up and up forever, in theory. And so they produce lots of tomatoes. What will happen in Oregon is that, or at least where we are in Portland, Oregon, is these tomatoes will die probably in October. And you know, most of the country, they tell you, well, you can grow tomatoes until it gets too cold, until it frosts. But that's not the problem here. What will happen in October is it'll start raining so hard that there'll be so much moisture in the ground, and the tomatoes will be sucking up so much moisture, the tomatoes will actually split from just having too much water content in them, and they just get mushy and gross. And so that's generally when our tomatoes are done here in Portland, is when they start splitting and getting mushy from just having too much water. So if you follow me down this row, I'll show you kind of what we've done here. Is when we single stem the tomatoes, we've cut off all the lower branches to keep them away from the ground. That keeps them good for pests. It also keeps good air circulation between the different tomato plants, and allows me to grow more variety. So each of these tomato plants is a different kind of tomato. And so I cut the stems, and as these grow up, they'll naturally want to bush out, and so I'll come along and trim them so they just stay with one single stem that goes up the post. Okay, what I'm doing now is I'm working on this bed, which has tomatoes. I planted a few French marigolds in there, but I've got a bunch of leftover eggplants and peppers that I'm actually going to plant here as well. But it's not the eggplants and peppers. What I really wanted to show you was what I'm doing on the tomatoes. And so what we do single stemming the tomatoes, and so I've cut all the lower branches off and then cut it down to one stem, as you can see here, and then tied it against these posts. And then these tomatoes are indeterminate. All the tomatoes we grow here are indeterminate tomatoes, so they will grow up these posts and produce lots of tomatoes throughout the season, hopefully. Okay, so I'm really going to get down in there. So you can see that I've got kind of a little bit of a bush starting there with some of the tomatoes because I haven't trimmed them yet. And so I'm going to show you kind of how I do that, and we'll see if you can see over my shoulder well enough to see what I'm doing. Okay, so you can see this guy has been allowed to grow without any training so far. It's time to start training it. Maybe it's past time to start training it. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to start by cutting the lower branches out of my way so I can see what's going on. You don't need those. I don't really want tomatoes growing down that low anyway. That's when the slugs and bugs and stuff get into them. Okay. I'm going to pull what I cut out of the way here. Pull some more that I didn't get. Investigate that a little bit. There we go. Okay, so I've got that, and now that should be good. So you can see here, this is a good example. This has been allowed to go too far. This is the main branch here, right here, and then this is the branch that's growing out of the elbow. Some people call it that, the elbow there, and so that's the one you want to get rid of. Those are the suckers that would divert the plant into multiple branches and not be growing in the way we want to grow. Now, this isn't the only way to grow tomatoes. Of course, there's people who do allow the suckers to grow, and they basically put a cage over it and they just allow the whole thing to bush out in all directions, and that's fine too. That's just not my style, in part because if I were going to do that, each of these plants would take more space and they would yield more, which is fine, but I'm growing lots of different varieties, so I don't want any one plant to be taking up that much of the garden space because I want to make room for other varieties, so I get an abundance of variety in the garden that way. So I'd rather grow a single stem on one plant and more plants closer together. So my plant here is not that close. I don't really like how I did the tie there, so I'm going to do it again. Okay. Let's see if I can tie this part at the base closer here, and then I'll angle it up more. Try to do it without breaking the stem. I've broke stems before, and that's tragic. Spend all that time growing it, and then you kill your plant by being too aggressive or training it. But, you know, I grow a lot. I mean, we have like over 50 tomato plants here, so not too tragic. I can get over it if I broke one by accident. So there we go. Bend it back this way. Tie that up, and now we're on the right track here. This is where I want this to go. So that's it. And then, as you'll see, I've got the rest of this row here. Do the same thing. I'm going to be interplanting these as I go. Down here, we're growing marigolds, different kinds of marigolds with the tomato plants here. You know, it's an old-fashioned trick or idea that you plant your marigolds with the tomatoes, not only because it might look better, but the marigolds supposedly let off a scent or a fragrance or some kind of something that helps keep some of the natural tomato pests away. As a practical matter, growing tomatoes in Portland, Oregon, I've actually never had any tomato pests. So if they're growing too close to the ground, like slugs that are a pest for everything will get to them. But the ones that grow up here, like I've never had like a tomato hornworm or some of those things they talk about in the rest of the country. I just don't see it here. Maybe other people have in Portland, but I haven't seen it. Keep going this way. This is another tomato bed that we have. Tied these tomatoes up as well. You can see these are getting nice and strong in here. They've got nice thick stems and they're growing nice and tall. The yellow flowers, of course, are what will become the tomatoes. So this is what gets pollinated, and then they become the little tomatoes, which we will eventually eat. I'd say the majority of the kind of tomatoes that we're growing are cherry tomatoes. So we have some bigger ones, but I don't particularly like eating bigger tomatoes that much myself. So we stick with the cherry tomatoes, the really kind of sweet ones that are fun to eat. And then I'll take you down here. This is the last tomato bed. It's down this way. And so we've got tomatoes in there. We haven't staked yet. I'm still working on staking these. So these haven't been tied up yet. These are the youngest tomatoes we had. These are the last ones we put in the field so far. Again, we put marigolds in front of them here. And we have these bamboo poles that we're doing. And so we'll cut these off here, probably about the height of my hand so that they can be reached. So we'll cut these bamboo poles off at some point, and that'll be that for these tomatoes. We'll see how far they grow. So that's it. That's what we're doing for tomatoes this season, and I'll see you next time when we talk about something else.
Thank you.